Welcome to the Book Bungalow. This event is part of the 24th Annual Utah Humanities Book Festival. The annual free festival is the Utah Humanities gift to the community, allowing us to explore all sorts of ideas by interacting with great writers like Melanie. The complete program is available at www.utahhumanities.org. Our thanks to the Book Festival's major sponsors, George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, Salt Lake City Arts Council, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Fund, Summit County RAP, Weber County RAMP, the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, the King's English Bookshop in Salt Lake City, Weller Bookworks, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Catalyst. We acknowledge that the Book Bungalow resides on the original territory once inhabited by the ancestral Puebloans and the Fremont indigenous peoples. Today, southwestern Utah is primarily home to the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe and the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah, a confederation of 5 bands: Cedar, Indian Peaks, Kanash, Kusharam, and Shivwits. Tribes that have been living, working, and residing on this land from time immemorial. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from the land, and we honor and respect the indigenous peoples still connected to the land on which we gather. Please let's take a moment of silence to think about and pay respect to the indigenous peoples of past and present. Through the end of October, the Book Bungalow is offering a wide variety of author events and even a writing workshop as part of the Utah Humanities Book Festival. We invite you to take a look at our schedule on our website and register now if you want to attend an event, whether it's live or virtual, because we're doing both. I'll be posting our website link in the chat room, along with a link to order Melanie's book and another link to a book festival audience survey. Please take a moment to complete the survey after the event for an opportunity to win a $10 gift card to the King's English in Salt Lake City. Now, next year we hope we can offer our own gift cards. But finally, at the conclusion of Melanie's reading and her interview with me, I'm sure she would be happy to answer questions from those in the audience. So feel free to pose them in the Q&A or the chat room, whichever you prefer. Melanie Moyer is a copywriter and author of 2 novels. The Rules of Me, published in 2018 through Waterton Publishing, and now The Original Glitch, which came out October 5th through Lanternfish Press. Her short fiction has been published in Ghost Parachute, Meat for Tea, and A Woman is a Cinema. Her nonfiction and criticism pieces have appeared on Pop Sugar, Prometheus Dreaming, and DIY MFA.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
It sounds for DIY MFA. It's a group that does like webinars and podcasts and that sort of thing for, like basically do it yourself MFA.
Okay.
They have some pretty cool conversations though with authors.
Yeah. I'll bet. Well, why don't we begin with a short reading from your novel to give our viewers an idea of the story, and then I'll follow up with some questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Chapter 4. Adler often thought going through grad school might have been a mistake. He knew that, logically, it wasn't true. He was learning things they'd never let undergraduates get near, experiencing things he never would if he was back at his mom's townhouse in Scranton. But in the small moments where he was not up against the deadlines for papers or lectures, he felt the weight of staying still. Palmer College was not a place that advertised its presence. It was the kind of place that was found when it wanted to be. He didn't want to know the full story behind its fat endowments, how the Barron Consortium had come to funnel so much money over so much time into its labs. Like sausage making, better not to know the secrets. An exaggeration, maybe, but not by much. Still, not knowing the details had this way of making him feel like a child. He was almost 27 and hadn't lived in his mother's house for years, but he was still in school, still woke up every morning in an apartment the school provided. It was one that they wouldn't let him burn candles or incense in or own a pet. It felt like a practice life. Wilson would tell him that that was exactly why he kept coming back to it. The safety was addictive. He was only able to banish these thoughts when night fell and he was staring at the glow of his computer screen, typing rapidly at whatever asinine project that was keeping him awake, and then puzzling at the inevitable bug within an overworked Google tab. Tonight, an app requested by the student body for monitoring transit times on the campus shuttles. If even one of you thinks about shouting, "I'm in" during this class, your ass is going to the library for a week to think about what you did, a middle school teacher had once said the first time he stepped into a coding class. We're writing an instruction manual for building from a tree to a chair, not hacking into the FBI. Adler had eventually built a dice rolling simulator. Right now, everyone on campus was relying on a crowdsourced social media hashtag whips, where is Palmer Shuttle. They'd stolen the tag for their project, the Whips app. Adler switched on music to fill the quiet, and it blared in his ears, song after song, blending into each other as if he were blacking out through sections of code and waking up hours later. But if he took the headphones off, he'd be left with no sound except the thwacking of keys and the jittering of his own leg bouncing the contents of his desk. He was going to need to write another test. He scribbled that down in his notebook labeled simply bugs. Code, bug, think, test, move on, repeat ad nauseum. He'd almost won a Kaggle competition 2 years ago on object detection and images for AI. The prize was $25,000. He didn't win, but his mentor, Dr. Kent, was impressed. Told him he was the only one, as far as she could see, who had tried to account for the differing levels of zoom in the images on the human faces in the test set with generative adversarial networks. His girlfriend, Charlie, was less impressed, at least when he rattled it off as clinically as that. I was accounting for bias in a training set. He tried again, but she was going to be a librarian. Someone did all her coding for her. When he told her that it was possible to trick computer vision with overtraining, she had too many questions and he got frustrated. She told him then that he liked talking, not educating. He turned red and did not disagree. Despite that, he knew she had a vision for how their worlds would fit together. One day they'd live and work together in some dinky library at the edge of the world where she would be in charge of books and he'd be there to fix the website and design graphics for marketing or some shit. And they'd live in their townhouses and have a boy and a girl, and he'd go bald and she'd drive a minivan. Thinking of a version of himself that was a suburban dad working on web design with a beer belly and a patch of bald skin on the top of his scalp made his skin itch. Missed call, Charlie, was stamped across the front of his phone with a lovely 3 next to it and several texts waiting to be read just underneath. He couldn't blame her, but he hadn't promised they'd do dinner. He'd said he'd let her know if he ended up being free. If. And again, he hated it when people didn't answer the phone for him. Wilson often left his phone on silent, face down, because of the possibility of communication gave him anxiety. He never answered on the first try unless you were extremely lucky in your timing. So Adler could only imagine Charlie's frustration when he kept pounding away at the keyboard, watching worlds come into life on the computer screen instead of even looking to see if her calls were for an emergency. They weren't. They might be, but they weren't. Speaking of Wilson, "Hi," Adler said as soon as Wilson accepted the call. "You're getting clingy." "I just love hearing your voice." The tone was joking. At the same time, Wilson was Adler's only friend, or at least the only one he'd really been able to talk to since Dr. Kent died. Wilson was the only person who made that story as simple as it was. "She killed herself, man. I'm sorry." "I'm working on some stuff for the dumb transit app," Adler said. "Thinking about taking a break, though. Work on some stuff for the box." "Doesn't sound like a break." "We need some liquid for the automated messages and the terminal sends. It's been auto-populating the wrong dates, which isn't all that terrible, but Horn is paranoid. I think it's the lack of sleep." "Oh, good. You did, in fact, call to talk about work." "At least this is the go to jail if you tell anyone work," Adler reminded him. Oh yeah, top secret campus transit app. No, I mean the box, idiot. I figured you'd be a little bit more interested in that than Call of Duty. I like killing terrorists more than hearing me be self-deprecating. You do know I love to listen to you bruise your own ego. There was a shuffle on the line as Wilson resituated himself. He was getting ready for a long talk, Adler imagined, with the phone smashed between his ear and shoulder because it was too late at night for speakerphone and his boyfriend Cam was asleep. The shit is really complicated. Adler leaned back, lifting his fingers off the keys for the first time in hours. And I need someone to rant to. To find out about the rant, you'll have to read the book.
Yeah, I read the book and it was a fascinating read. And first of all, well, I'm going to ask this first. I was going to ask it later, but do you have a background in computer science or study artificial intelligence? How did you know all of this grammar, the terminology and everything?
So pretty much all of it is over years being self-taught through freelance jobs that I had to do. I don't have a background in it. I can't do math or any of that stuff that's actually required for it. But I, for the past several years, have worked as a ghostwriter. And a couple of the projects I had to do were things around artificial intelligence and data science. And I still do a lot of it. I provide show notes for a data science podcast. So every week I'm listening to 2 or 3 episodes of these, people who have, done this for 20 years talk back and forth, and I have to transcribe it and then make sure I understand what it means when I put in like the summaries of episodes. And it was a combination of all that. And then we actually had a subject matter expert go through it during the editing process just to make sure it all was correct and I didn't, misinterpret anything.
Okay, so you haven't done coding yourself or?
No, I've done like HTML style coding and, I've had to do that for jobs. But it's nothing like, actual like neural networks and the things that are in the book.
Yeah. Okay, well, what led you to write this particular story?
Going back to one of the jobs that I did as a ghostwriter, I had to ghostwrite a book that was basically just kind of a very like simple, it was like I want to say like a 10,000, 12,000 word ebook that was meant to be on artificial intelligence. And I had to do a lot of research for it. And it probably didn't turn out that good, but I did it for pennies, literal pennies. But I got really interested in doing the research for that when I learned about sort of these concepts of AI boxes, which obviously figure a lot in the book, and the idea that it could be, virtually anything. But I was just thinking about, what would that look like? What would it look like from the point of view of being inside one? And then, going down that rabbit hole, I learned about things like simulation hypothesis and that sort of thing. So it really started from there and just wanting to basically like thinking about it in terms of like an opposite of like the Turing test, which is like an artificial intelligence so smart it tricks humans into thinking it's human, which I feel like we're already there. Like I feel like I talk to chat boxes that I am convinced for a minute are actually like a person. But what I was interested in is an artificial intelligence that would be, so smart and so efficient that we tricked it into thinking it was human. And what would that feel like? What would that look like?
Can you explain? When I got to the part where you're describing the box for Theo, I wasn't quite sure. Can you, without giving anything away in the book, can you explain what an artificial intelligence in a box would look like?
Yeah, so it's funny because it's pretty much, all theoretical or mostly theoretical. I mean, the way when we talk about artificial intelligence today, we're talking about like captchas when you have to do like those things when you're filling something out and it says pick the like all the pictures with bikes in it. and you
Mm-hmm.
have to click those. What that does is that data feeds to a artificial intelligence that's being trained. It's probably, in that case, it's maybe something that's a like a self-driving car that's learning what red lights are or learning what a bike is,
Uh-huh.
because you're kind of acting as the like control set against its learning. So that's like what we're talking about today in the world when we talk about artificial intelligence. But examples that I was seeing when I was doing research is, it could be like if we looked at like media like Ex Machina, like that is like the concept of that movie would have been an AI box, or it could be an entire artificial environment in which the artificial intelligence, has a sort of sandbox to play in. I want to say it was like a year or two ago, they developed basically a sort of RPG video game, like RPG style video game, specifically to train artificial intelligences. It was a video game environment for artificial intelligence to basically learn and,
Huh.
fail and try again. So it can be literally, it could be anything.
Okay. So
Yeah.
uh, somebody is asking what were some of the
Mhm.
influences for this book and was Frankenstein. And I wanted to ask, did
Mhm.
you have this in mind from the beginning to do kind of a contemporary retelling of Frankenstein? And is Mary Shelley a favorite of yours? Or what brought this idea of the monster getting loose?
Mhm. The Frankenstein thing actually came about a little bit, more organically through drafting. As I was working through some of this, it, occurred to me that it was a somewhat similar situation, or, at least an analog when I was thinking about places to go to think about, like if I was getting stuck in things to read or things to think about. And I love Frankenstein. It's I have my bookshelves organized, and I've got a copy. I somehow ended up with multiple copies, but one of them's on my my shelf over there off camera. That's like my favorites. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy watching different adaptations of it. I think it's got some really great poetic language to it. And, that's where in the beginning of the book, we have that quote, I ought to be thy Adam, rather, I'm the fallen angel. And that actually comes from the original title of the book was Ought to Be Thy Adam when I was shopping it. And then, we decided it was decided on a more marketable title, but we would keep that kind of at the
Yeah,
beginning,
these
which I
marketing people kind
yeah.
of
I
get
was
in
like,
the way with
whatever,
titles.
whatever works for you guys. But no, they're smarter folks than I am. But it definitely came about during the drafting process, just because I was looking for places to think about you know, the sort of like humanity aspect of it. Like there's a lot of books I could turn to learn about science, to learn about the technology, and learn about the things that would make up the plot, but to really like get inside what these characters were feeling. Like that's one of the big things I turned to. And then it kind of turned out to be a sort of, if Frankenstein as a story existed today, it would probably look, the technology that it would this they would be using would be not all that dissimilar. So
That's true. That's true.
yeah.
Um, do you read a lot of science fiction that has elements of creepiness or horror to them?
Yeah, I
What are your
definitely do. I read a lot of both of horror and science fiction, and I've definitely read them both together. It's funny because I didn't really think about this book too much as like a sort of horror novel, and I don't really think it is, but I've seen a few people point out like, yeah, there's some creepiness to it, and
There's creepy. Yeah, it's
there's
not really
creepiness,
horror.
but it's interesting because I don't consider Frankenstein is so interesting because it is the what we consider to be the first science fiction novel. I think in the ways it has been adapted over the years, it's kind of become like people's sort of go-to creature feature story, which I don't think it necessarily was intended to be. So it's interesting the way that genres change and the way that people respond to different things, but I definitely do enjoy reading and watching and taking in creepy science fiction horror.
Now, I don't know much about your first novel. How
Mhm.
does it compare to what's the rules of me about? Or
Yeah, so the rules of me, actually, I have a copy here. The rules of me, there it is,
got
is
it?
it's a YA novel, and
Oh,
it's not science fiction. It's magical realism, is
ah,
how I would define it. But it basically is a sort of coming of age story for a like preteen teenage girl, told from the point of view of a imaginary friend,
so it's
essentially.
really different. Okay,
It's very different. It was
very different. So you're
yeah, it's
not
very
just a
different.
science fiction writer. You
No, I would like to write as much as possible in many different things, which I know is not always easy. I see a lot of authors who will switch between pen names and that sort of thing for different genres they write in. And I know Stephen King kind of famously, when he tried to dip his toes into fantasy, people kind of freaked out. So then he wrote Misery in response, to like kind of talk about how he was feeling. So I would love though to write, like I would love to write more science fiction. I would love to write something in the more horror category. I would, love it if somebody thought of my something I wrote as, literary fiction and that sort of thing. So
okay?
I'd love to, try it all.
Okay. Now I found when I read it that there was a real feeling. There's a real undercurrent of religion
Mm-hmm.
because you've got the creation story with Adam and Eve, and then you have the creation of Theo and another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, were you thinking of that from the beginning, or did that just develop organically as the story went along?
I definitely was thinking about that from the beginning, partially because it was sort of like a um, concept that was a holdover from another story I'd been thinking about a long time ago that this is definitely the better version of. But when I was in school, I got a certificate in religious studies, and I took a lot of classes on specifically Abrahamic religions.
Uh-huh.
So, a lot of that, I enjoy reading, the sort of verses for the like the poeticism of it. I think the stories are very fascinating. I've written, papers on them from a literature perspective and that sort of thing. And it's always something that I've like really thought very interesting to marry into science fiction. Just because I think there's a real interesting thing that happens when you sort of blend the humanities with science and technology. And
Yeah.
this felt like kind of the perfect place for that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, which was the which chapter came most easily to you in writing, and why do you think that was?
I
Or
think
which scene?
I think a lot of the Laura chapters definitely came. A lot of the early Laura chapters came. Once things start to get a little tricky, then it, But
So you had her very firmly in mind.
yeah, she was actually the first character. Like that's kind of where it all sprang from.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, writing those early chapters was definitely because it was also an exercise in me airing my complaints about, my that time in my life. A lot of that is stuff that I was going through, things I was
You
you know
identified with her quite a bit.
oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I identified with Adler too. I identified with Theo. I mean, I like to say that I try to put a little bit of myself in every character, so you're never quite sure which character is like, so nobody picks one and says this one's you, but I definitely, she got a lot of like the actual things that were happening and I was dealing with, and things that I was very concretely annoyed with, but so did
Was
Adler as well.
was there a certain point in the book where you kind of got stuck and you weren't quite sure? What was the most difficult or challenging part?
The most challenging part, I think, was the end. Um, like
How to
the
wrap it
building
up?
up to that. Yeah, yeah. Because I was trying, because that required a lot of it had to be technologically correct. Like I didn't want it to be something that wasn't going to make sense. And in addition to that, I also wanted it to be something that I was going to enjoy writing, that I felt was going to be, like an earned ending, as they say. And there was a couple different things that I tried, and I'm ultimately happy with where it ended up, but it was very much like, kind of racking my brain and doing a lot of research to make sure that like it ended up in a place that made sense, in a place that felt like it had been leading to there.
Yeah.
But it definitely was the thing that gave me the most anxiety while writing.
Who, other than Theo and Laura and Adler, who was the most fun character for you to write? Or the most interesting, if not fun?
I think I really enjoyed writing Bev.
The
She's a
psycho.
yeah, she's a psychologist or a psychology student. She was her character is like a consultant who kind of gets wrapped up into this, and I really enjoyed her just because I just enjoyed the way she talked. I enjoyed writing for her, and then I also enjoyed doing research for a lot of the things she was talking about, and she's like a tiny, tiny bit based on a woman who I actually who was technically my boss at a like sort of semester job I had in college, who was a sociologist,
Oh,
who she probably, if you Google her, she's like all over like various documentaries and things now, but she studies specifically like fear, and like she studies it through looking at the way people react in haunted houses and the way that people react in scary movies and that sort of thing.
what
She does
college?
really interesting work. So,
What college did you go to?
University of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you sent her a copy of your book?
No, I haven't talked to her in a long time. Um, I think I interviewed her a while back. It was one of my articles on Pop Sugar, but it's just a tiny bit based. I mean, it's a very different character, but I thought about a lot of the things she talked about in her work and kind of, applied them here. But that character was definitely pretty fun to write. And she was also kind of a surprise because she wasn't in earlier drafts.
Oh,
Um,
really? Why did
yeah,
you, so what made you introduce her?
she it's like it was partially out of like I felt the need that there needed to be sort of somebody else here who could be a voice for, you know, the act like an actual like practical voice for a lot of the things that Theo was going through and a lot of the ways that he was behaving. But I didn't want her to just be like, okay, we're just going to wheel in the psychologist every time we want her to explain something and wheel her away. So I really had to integrate her into, helping to build a relationship that she would have with different characters. Um, and that was a challenge. It took a couple drafts to make sure it wasn't, I wasn't just here's the character to come in with a chalkboard and to walk away. But she definitely was born out of necessity before she was she became sort of the character that ended up on the pages.
And was Adler fully formed in your head before you began drafting, or was it Laura that was fully formed in your head?
I think Laura was fully formed.
Adler kind of developed as you went along.
Yeah, he also went through some changes because, if you can believe it, he was more unlikable in earlier drafts.
Really?
Yeah. He definitely.
So you had editors say, you got to make this guy more likable.
Yeah, well, basically the edit was, it's okay if he's unlikable. It just needs to be clear from where the book's perspective and where the book is, that like it's aware that he's unlikable, like the story is aware of this. Because I kind of like the idea of writing somebody who I really don't relate to in some of the things he thinks and says, and I find him at times kind of annoying. But I thought that was an interesting challenge to have this sort of POV character who is very unlikable, but can you be willing to root for him to, just try and make the right choice, try and fix things. And I think a big push for that is the people around him. the characters around him. And then also, you want, Laura, I think, is a lot more likable. We want her to succeed. And if that's going to happen, then, Adler needs to get his stuff together. So it's kind of like an interesting relationship between those two characters, where it's sort of like a marriage of need and arrangement. And I like the idea of having people who really, it felt real to have somebody who is just not going to be super likable or enjoyable.
Uh-huh. One of our viewers wants to know what you hope readers get from your book.
It's funny because I've been asked this before, and I think of like 15 different things every time. Because
Okay,
on the one hand, well, on the one hand, I thought it would be an interesting, one thing I hope people take from it is, an interest in artificial intelligence and an interest in some of the topics that come up in there. Because apart from the fact that a lot of it is obviously very advanced and fantastical and things that we're not going to be able to probably achieve in our lifetime, there are, I talk about in there where the characters do real things that are real problems right now, in artificial intelligence and equity and equality and fairness in artificial intelligence, and sort of who's at the controls.
Yeah, there's a lot of ethical issues.
Yeah. And it's funny because this book came out the day after, Facebook finally came back online after all that nonsense. So I got a lot of questions about that. And that's tied into a lot of this is, computers, artificial intelligence only knows what we tell it. So the person who's giving it information, who that person is, what they think, what their life experience was, it's all very important. And it's important to have not a room full of all people who look exactly the same, who are the same gender and all these other things, making decisions on technology that could be very, very dangerous. So that's one thing that I hope people will take. Another thing is, I guess, sort of just the curiosity for the nature of our universe. Because I sort of, I posit in there, or I drop sort of like situations where characters posit, kind of thinking about what we know as simulation hypothesis and that sort of thing. And it's funny because that also wasn't as strong in the book in earlier drafts as it became. And I think it comes from studying it, doing a lot of research on it, and then kind of like really thinking about it and thinking about it as
for those who may not, can you kind of explain what simulation hypothesis is?
Sure. So simulation hypothesis is, exactly what it sounds like. It's a hypothesis about the nature of the universe, that we're living in some sort of simulated reality, which could be, something like the Matrix. There's actual science and physics that people have put forward that, when looked at a certain way, it backs this up. It's gone from being sort of a fringe thing, I think, to being like, Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about it. Occasionally Elon Musk tweets about it when he's, in between all the other stuff he tweets about. But it's an interesting thing. And, I mentioned some things in there. I think there's like a name drop at one point about the double slit experiment.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting and worth looking up, just because, if nothing else, it's a really weird physics experiment with really strange implications. But basically, a simulation hypothesis is, we're living in the Matrix.
Do you give credence to that personally?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm never going to know, but it's something I definitely haven't ruled out. And especially, like, it's a fun thing people like to say when something weird happens. They're like, oh my gosh, this is proof we're living in a simulation. No, I think I really enjoy looking at things like that, because there's, this is completely not completely off topic, but there's like this thing called the Fermi, I'm not sure how you say it, paradox, which basically asks, where are the aliens? And one of the theories is, oh, well, it's a simulation, so there are no aliens because it's just us in the simulation. But there's some other really goofy, interesting theories in there. Some of them are a little bit more, some of them are worth a little bit more time than others. But yeah.
So it kind of made me think with Laura, it kind of, well, did you watch, is it The Truman Show? Was that the movie? That...
People have brought that up, and this is a situation where I'm not lying when I said I have not seen it.
Oh.
Because I feel like people, when they get their stuff compared to something, people are like, well, I've never heard of that. I don't know it. And it's like, I vaguely, I guess I'd heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And after this book came out, like Publishers Weekly mentioned The Truman Show. It's all been mentioned favorably. But
Yeah.
I was just
Okay.
like, I haven't seen it.
Well, tell us a bit more about your writing process. And, it seems like you dabble in a lot of different things. Are you the kind of writer that can focus on, have two or three things going at once, or are you just linear and you only do one thing, finish that, and then move on to the next?
When I wrote this, it was definitely the only thing I was working on. That started in 2016, 2017. Since then, I've definitely morphed into doing multiple things at once. Like even right now, like this morning, I finished the first draft on a short story I was working on, and then I got coffee, and then I immediately switched over to editing I'll call it the first draft, because the first draft was really the zero draft of a new manuscript for a new book. That I've redrafted once already, and now I'm kind of like, I was like making plans to edit for the next round and that sort of thing. And I have a couple more short stories I want to start to work on, but I also have to edit this one that I just finished in a couple weeks after I let myself step away from it. So it's funny because I feel like this happened a lot coming out of the pandemic, as much as out of the pandemic as we can be right now. But because during that time period, I wasn't writing anything because, I just couldn't. And, that was a very like existential battle I had with myself. And I had to be reminded that, like, we were all going through something incredibly traumatic, and all my brain's creative energy was going towards dealing with that. But once, things did start to relax and vaccines started happening, I feel like all that sort of pent up not writing sort of just like.
So now you're back to your usual normal routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what is that, getting up early in the morning, or do you write at night, or?
I definitely write in the morning. I mean, occasionally I'll write at night if I feel so inspired by something, but the best time for me is definitely in the morning. I kind of have like an early body clock. I'll get up and I'll write until I don't want to anymore, or I'll, put myself, I have to sometimes tell myself, okay, stop, quit while you're ahead so that you're ending in a good place. As opposed to trying to force myself to hit a certain word count, because I know a lot of, every author out there who is of a certain caliber has their own sort of magic formula for how many words you're supposed to write a day. And I just never, like, I definitely, like when I was in college, I was like, oh my God, I got to do this. But like now as my own adult writer person, like it's not something I ascribe to, because I think everyone's different. And if you get 500 words, if you get one sentence a day, like sometimes I write one sentence that I thought of while I was walking home, and that feels like a triumph. And I also think a lot of those folks who throw out big word count numbers don't realize that a lot of them are white men who have wives who are raising their children and all these other things. But I definitely don't try and like really push myself, but sometimes it takes a lot of like mental speaking of, you don't have to be productive today if it's not coming to you. But sometimes I blink and a couple thousand words have gone on the page.
Wow.
It's not
Um,
often, but it can happen.
well, who are some of your, I was going to say sci-fi, who are some of your favorite sci-fi authors, but you seem to be interested in a lot of things. So who are some of your favorite authors and why?
A few of my favorite authors definitely dip into sci-fi in multiple genres. I really love Carmen Maria Machado. She's got a great short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties, which has some sci-fi, more horror, I think, and sort of Shirley Jackson-esque creepy
Mhm.
things. But she definitely dips into sci-fi. I love Ted Chiang. I really gravitate, and with him in particular, I gravitate towards sci-fi short stories, I think, more than anything else, because I just find they like encapsulate some sort of concept so like perfectly, and like, we'll just drop these really great stories into them, like I think like the famous one from him being The Story of Your Life, which became the movie Arrival, and to think all of that was contained in a short story is I find that to be very cool.
Yeah.
um
My hat's
I
off to anybody who can write short stories
Yeah,
because
it's
I
definitely a
just not
skill
in.
I'm still working on. But I'm looking at my shelf here. I also really enjoy N.K. Jemisin, who goes through sci-fi and fantasy, but really like her stuff. And I also really like, it's more speculative, although I guess we were talking about any of my favorite writers, but Marlon James. Really, really love. He wrote I always say it backwards, Black Leopard, Red Wolf,
Oh,
and A Brief History of Seven Killings, which I think won the Booker Prize. Um, he's great. He writes. He's coming up with he's got a sequel coming out to Black Leopard, Red Wolf, and he just writes such interesting speculative fantasy sci-fi. Like it's very very cool.
huh.
But yeah, I think I'm also looking. Oh, I also really love Jose Saramago, which is more. He does some weird stuff. I wouldn't even call it magical realism. Some of it's kind of speculative. But his one that he's probably most famous for is Blindness, which I think I can't remember what it won, but it's basically about a sudden epidemic of just people going blind, and some people went
Uh,
blind and some people didn't. And it's a really good one.
wow. And that's a novel
Mm-hmm.
or short?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Okay.
novel. Yeah, I've
Um,
read a bunch of his other stuff, but that's his biggest work.
have you thought about entering the Writers of the Future contest, which is
I've
about it's short stories, science fiction or fantasy?
mhm. I've heard about it. I've never actually given it a try.
Okay.
I get so I try I get so and I keep trying, like I keep doing it, but I do get so it's easy to get discouraged, I feel, with short story competitions, but it's also like remembering that all of this is very subjective. And if
Yeah,
nothing else, you have a full complete story at the end that you can, try and do something else with. But I
that's
have
true.
heard of that contest.
True. So, are you at work on other things now? You've referred to a few things, but for
Mhm.
you personally, can you tell us anything about what you're working on for your next? Are you going to do another novel?
Yeah, so I have, as I said, it was like the one draft. This technically it's the second draft, but it's like not there yet enough. I'd say to call it a second draft, but
Oh,
it's a novel.
I thought you were referring to somebody else's work that you were editing.
Oh no, I was editing my own.
Okay.
I
Okay.
had written a first draft, didn't look at it for a few months, and now I'm going back and kind of taking like editorial notes of things after my second draft of it, of things that I want to think about for the next draft. So but working on that, it's definitely more in the realm of like literary horror. I've been reading Stephen Graham Jones. He does really, really cool stuff with that. Basically, I would love to take what Mike Flanagan does on film and apply it to a book, because I think he makes these really awesome, just really emotional, like gut punch stories that happen to have like really creepy horror elements to them, and I think he does it so well.
Yeah.
The newest one that came out, Midnight Mass, was really good. So
Wow. Well, those were all of my questions. KR, are you going to ask any more, or do we? There's another person in the chat. I haven't seen any. Maybe I should check the Q&A. Let's see. Close. Is there anything? Oh, there's a question in Q&A. Well, no, that was the one you answered. Okay. About what you hope readers gain from your books. Well, have you found the publishing process to be frustrating or satisfying in the end? Or was your first book was published by a different publisher, right?
yeah.
And you have an agent?
I don't have an agent.
You
No.
don't have an agent?
Okay. No, that is yeah. I mean, working with Lanternfish Press has been, awesome. They're a really, really awesome independent publisher. It's entirely woman owned. They put out really great stuff, and they're very on top of everything. And I think they do really beautiful covers of books. The woman who I always get her name wrong. I always want to call her a different name than what is her name. Glider. What's on the back of the woman who designed the covers on the back? Something K Glider. Kimberly Glider. I always want to say like Kristen or something. I don't know why. Kimberly Glider designed the cover, and she did an awesome job. But no, I found it a very, the process that kind of writers will be familiar with. And, you write the manuscript, you get it, you do, when it's ready to go, you throw it out into the void of literary agents, and hope at some point in the next 6 months somebody asks to see like the first 15 pages or what have you. And then I've never gotten past that point, so I don't know what happens after a literary agent says, great, I want to represent you, and then you go through submission and potentially auction and that sort of thing.
So you submitted this directly to Lanternfish Press?
I did. Yeah, they accept. They have a couple periods a year, and they accept direct from authors. And they actually, the first time I submitted to them, they didn't accept it. They gave me some notes. They wanted me to work on it some more. And about a year or so later, I submitted again, and they thought it was ready to go at that point.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Now, do you have a cat?
I don't currently. I've had many cats, and there is in the dedication. It's dedicated to a former cat of mine who basically was sitting behind me the entire time I was writing this, and unfortunately, about 2 years, maybe almost 3 years ago now, we had to put him to sleep. Yeah, he definitely worked his way into the.
So he wasn't in there from the beginning in your mind, but you decided.
He kind of was. He kind of was, and I didn't realize till later exactly how much having him just kind of lingering near me probably really ingrained him in the story. But the cat on the front cover of this book has been a big. People really love this cat. Whenever they talk about the cover, they're like, I love the cat. And he's in different, like he's on the back, he's all over the place. But I also just really love cats. And at that time too, I was writing, and this is something I'm still doing. I was in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign where like my familiar for my character, and that was a cat. And so
Okay,
Yeah.
if there are no other questions, I think we will wrap it up now, but I wanted to thank you for spending this time with us, Melanie,
Thank you.
answering my questions and the questions from others. And remember, all of you, if you want a copy of the original Glitch, either stop by our store or order through our website in the next day or so. I forgot to put things in the chat, but I always send a follow-up email that include the links to this recording, the link to the order page on our website, and I will also include the link to the survey because I forgot to put that in too. But I want you to, all of you, to stay safe and have a great evening. And thanks again, Melanie.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.